For a long time, there were no legal rules for parties in Great Britain. Parties were understood as an expression of social initiatives for which the state is not responsible and which it should not finance with tax money. There is therefore no very reliable data on the development of party memberships or the financing of the parties. It was not until 1998 that the Conservative Party introduced membership dues. However, it can be said that active citizens in Great Britain are much more likely to organize in interest groups of all kinds than in parties. The number of members of all parties is estimated at 600 to 700,000. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds alone has over 800,000 members. All British parties are in financial difficulties today. That is why the entry into state party financing has begun. In 2001, the Political Parties Election and Referenda Act, the PPERR, came into force, requiring parties to submit an annual statement of accounts showing all local donations over £200 and national donations over £5,000. The PPERA also specifies a maximum sum for the party's election campaign expenditures and prohibits campaign donations from abroad. The law introduced a taxpayer fund for party program work administered by the newly established Electoral Commission. In addition, the parties received funds to enable them to meet their new reporting obligations, as well as greater financial support for their group work in Parliament. In 2007, the Parliament decided to financially support the individual MPs in their public relations work. The British party system is often referred to as a two-party system because in the post-war period only two parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, alternated in the exercise of government power. However, the number of parties in Parliament is larger, and it has now become difficult to speak of party competition working equally across the UK. Let's first talk about the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party, the Tories, is the successor party to the Tory Party, the party of the land-owning gentry. There is no formal founding date of the party. It was formed in the 1930s. Benjamin Disraeli formed the Conservatives organizationally and programmatically into a patriotically oriented potential People's Party. In terms of foreign policy, the nation was to have a common interest in preserving and flourishing the British Empire, and internally, social reform legislation was intended to mitigate class antagonisms. In the period after the Second World War, Great Britain had to say goodbye to its empire, but the party's initially welfare state orientation found sufficient points of contact in the tradition of conservatism. The post-wartime prime ministers Winston Churchill, Sir Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan, and Sir Alec Douglas Home headed pragmatic centre-right governments keen on a few ideological principles. They were concerned with defending national traditions and institutions like God, King and Fatherland, protecting individual freedom and limit state intervention in the economy. However, economic liberalism was often paired with a socially motivated paternalism that legitimized socio-political corrections to the market economy. As Prime Minister Edward Heath tried unsuccessfully to give the party a more economically liberal profile. Heath ruled as a convinced European and in 1973 led his country into the EC, the later EU. Margaret Thatcher was the first to make supporters of welfare state policies a minority in her party in the 1980s. She committed the Conservatives to a strictly market-based course that was critical of European integration. Margaret Thatcher, like her predecessor Edward Heath, embodied a new breed of Tory leader. Both were social climbers and not, as was usual for Conservative Party leaders, representatives of the upper class. Heath was the first party leader to be appointed by an election of the Conservative Party parliamentary group. Before 1965, the selection decision for this office was based on internal agreements. In 1997, the election of the party leader by membership of the party was introduced. A pre-selection, which reduces the fields of candidates to two, is made by the parliamentary group. David Cameron has led the party since 2005, initially seen as a reformer capable of wresting leadership from Labour on domestic issues. He also faced his party's long-term problems. According to their own statements, their membership has fallen from 3 million members in 1950 to around 320,000 in 2005. Many of the traditional industry donors have withdrawn from the party, and the membership of the party is aging. The continuing high status of an anti-attitude towards the European Union, which also isolated the party in international cooperation between conservative parties, has had serious consequences. And we know what happened with Boris Johnson since then. Let's talk about the Liberal Democrats. By 1920, the Liberal Party, the second major party, has had a decisive say in British politics. Founded in 1859, it was the successor organization to the Whigs, the party of the big landowners and wealthy merchants. The main themes of the 19th century liberalism, shaped by William Gladstone, were the promotion of free trade, which was in the interest of the emerging industrial bourgeoisie, and an Irish autonomy regime granting Ireland a limited degree of home rule has been there. The Liberal Party was also the political pioneer on other issues, such as the extension of suffrage, the abolition of slavery, child protection legislation, law for the poor, factory legislation, the regulation of working hours, or local government reform. After the First World War, the Liberals were replaced by the Labour Party as the strongest opposition or potential governing party. Although they regularly achieved between 10 and 20% of the votes in elections, they usually did not get more than a dozen seats in Parliament. In recent decades, the Liberal Party has developed into a haven for opponents of the war and ecologically oriented individualists. Supporters of European integration, federalism, and the introduction of a proportional representation system also sought a political home with the Liberals. The party is particularly involved in local politics, where it has its political base. There it can draw on a large reservoir of activists with expertise in specific political issues such as education or health politics. In 1988, the Liberals merged with the Social Democratic Party, a right-wing split from the Labour Party, to form a party called the Liberal Democrats. The first new party chairman was Paddy Ashdown, who held his chairmanship until 1999. Ashdown in 1997 abandoned the traditional course of maintaining an equal distance between the two main parties. He saw the future of the Liberal Democrats alongside the Labour Party. Today, the question of the Liberal Democrats' affinity with one of the major parties is open again. The Liberal Democrats are to the left of the Labour Party in many policy areas, notably economic and social, civil rights and environmental policies, but also as opponents of Britain's involvement, for example, in the Iraq War at the time. Unlike both the Conservative Party and Labour, over 90% of their members support higher taxes to allow for more government spending. The Liberal Democrats, led by Nick Clegg since 2007, had around 76,000 members, but a lot changed after the coalition and especially with Brexit. And the Labour Party was founded in 1900. Then they were still called the Labour Representation Committee. The current name originated in 1906 as their political arm of the trade unions. This explains not only the Labour Party's financial dependence on the unions, which is still important today, but also its internal organization. Individual memberships and the collective membership of trade unions and socialist organizations coexist. Collective membership arises when organizations, primarily trade unions, collect membership dues for the Labour Party with their dues. In 1995, Tony Blair imposed a cap of 50% of the delegate vote from the union camp for Labour conventions. The other half of the delegate votes comes from the constituency representations. The party leader, who was determined solely by the parliamentary group until 1981, has since been elected by an electoral body made up of representatives of the trade unions, the party associations in the constituencies, and the members of parliament. Since the last party reform in 1993, these three groups have each had a third of the votes. In 2007, Union lost the right to table resolutions at party congresses. During the government of Clement Attlee, who surprisingly won the first post-war elections against the wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a policy of nationalization and socio-political reforms, including the establishment of the National Health Service and the establishment of a system of comprehensive social security laid the foundations of Britain's post-war welfare state. Only in the 1960s did the Labour Party, headed by Harold Wilson, regain government responsibility, but failed with its economic modernization program, not least because of resistance from the trade unions. After 1974, the attempt by Wilson and his successor James Callaghan to bring about a reconciliation of interests with the unions through joint government decisions with the unions on wage and income policy and price policy plunged the country into a deep economic crisis and also made clear the productivity gap in the British economy. The political alliance between the Labour Party and the unions collapsed in 1978-79 because of the unions' unwillingness to engage their membership in the vital but painful path of industrial restructuring in Great Britain. In the course of the programmatic and organizational renewal of the Labour Party, which party leader Neil Kinnock began in 1983, and which his successors John Smith and Tony Blair consistently continued, the party began to strengthen inner party democracy by mobilizing individual members and to bid farewell to state intervention in the economy and hostility to Europe. In a broad inner party discussion process, an orientation towards market economy principles prevailed. Since 1993, care has also been taken to ensure that both representatives of the constituency organizations and those of the trade unions obtain the vote of their base before casting their votes at party conferences. Tony Blair reinvented the party with a catchy name New Labour and tried to position it as the only stronghold of sensible and pragmatic politics in the party competition beyond right and left. In 2007, Gordon Brown took over the leadership of the Labour Party, and he relied less on political image cultivation than his predecessor. The buzzword New Labour disappeared from public debate in the last Blair years. Up until the onset of the global financial crisis in autumn 2008, Brown continued to trust in the helpful effects of the markets from an economic point of view and saw the European Union above all as an economic association and places the representation of national interests and the fight against terrorism at the forefront of his policy. The Labour Party has separated itself from the socialist vocabulary until then. The deletion of Article 4 from the party statutes, which was carried out in 1995 and which committed the party to a policy of nationalization, was of great symbolic value. The party was trying to break away from the unions financially and organizationally as far as this is possible. In view of the decline in union membership, this is necessary anyway. In 2004, only 22 of the 199 unions were still collective members of the Labour Party. In 2005, the Labour Party had around 215,000 individual members, and with Corbyn and Starmer, they are not on a rising way at the moment. And since the early 1970s, the party system in Northern Ireland has been detached from that in Great Britain and is only based on the lines of conflict in Northern Ireland. On the Unionist Protestant side, the Ulster Unionist Party, which emerged from the Conservative Party, represents the moderate current, and the Democratic Unionist Party, founded and led until 2008 by Ian Paisley, former Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, represents the most powerful part of the radical current. And now they have Donaldson, yeah. On the nationalist Catholic side, the Ulster Unionist moderate counterpart is the Social Democratic and Labour Party, which emerged from the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The radical wing of the nationalists supports Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Irish Republican Army that was led by Gary Adams at that time. A multi-party system has also become established in Scotland and Wales. In addition to the three traditional British parties, the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats, nationalist parties and the Greens are also successfully facing the political competition. In Scotland, the Labour Party has long been by far the strongest party until the SNP appeared. Now they are big time challenged by the Scottish National Party, the SNP, which has overtaken the Conservative Party as the largest party, first as the second largest party, and is now almost with a majority in government in Scotland. And the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Party are the smaller parties in Scotland today. And in Wales, the Nationalists of Plaid Cymru have not been quite as successful as the SNP, although they have been in a coalition government with the Labour Party, for example, since 2007. But the dominant party in Wales is the Labour Party, and then followed by Plaid Cymru, followed by sometimes the Conservatives, sometimes stronger, and the Liberal Democrats. So it's a little bit more mixed. But in Scotland, the Conservatives don't stand a chance at the moment because of the SNP. They're just one seat away from an absolute majority. And in Wales, Labour Party is the big one, the big player. And as we can expect in Northern Ireland very soon, for the very first time, Sinn Féin to be the strongest party there. So the party system is a bit shaken at the moment. And the current leaders of some parties, especially the biggest ones, are not really, let's say, the heroic kind. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.